What if everything they've told you about Aston Martin is a lie, and what they were really hiding in Alonso's car was not a secret advantage, but a problem so serious that they couldn't even allow it to be seen in the race? Because after the Chinese GP, something completely changed. Alonso couldn't hold the steering wheel, the car was falling apart lap after lap. And at that moment, Adrian Newey saw something that made him angry. But not because of an illegal trick, but because of something much worse that Aston Martin had been trying to hide from the beginning. It all starts with a narrative that went viral practically overnight. The idea that Aston Martin had hidden something in Fernando Alonso's car, something sophisticated enough to go unnoticed, until Adrian Newey discovered it after the Chinese Grand Prix. But when you start to dig deeper, when you cut through the noise and analyze what really happened, you realize that the story is completely different, and much more worrying. Because there is no real evidence of a hidden trick, no illegal element or secret aerodynamic solution that has been detected. All of this is born from a dangerous mix between speculation, recycling of past stories, and the need to create an impactful narrative. So, if there is nothing hidden, what really happened? The key is to understand the context with which Aston Martin reaches 2026. A completely new project, an association with Honda that promised to be the definitive leap, but that already generated doubts from within. And here comes a key figure, Adrian Newey. Because before the season even began, he had already issued a warning that at the time sounded exaggerated. He spoke of vibrations, of abnormal behavior in the car that could have real physical consequences for the drivers. At the time, no one took it as a red flag. It was pre-season, it was testing, and in Formula One there are always initial problems. But China changed absolutely everything. Because what we saw in that Grand Prix was not a simple abandonment, it was a brutal exposure of what was happening inside that car. Alonso, one of the most experienced drivers on the grid, began to show signs that did not fit with any conventional problem. It wasn't a lack of rhythm, it wasn't strategy, it wasn't a mistake. It was something physical. Something that prevented him from even maintaining control of the steering wheel normally. And this is where everything starts to take shape. The vibrations of the AMR-26 were not a minor technical detail. They were constant, deep, and most importantly, they were transmitted directly to the pilot's body. Numb hands, loss of sensitivity, difficulty reacting. The car was not only difficult to drive, it was downright unsustainable throughout a full race. This is not something you can easily hide, but you can try to contain it. And that's what Aston Martin had been doing. Limiting runs, adjusting settings, avoiding exposing the car to extreme conditions where the problem would become evident. But a Grand Prix does not forgive. And in China, when the car had to face the reality of a full race, it all came to light. Therefore, what many interpreted as Newey discovers a secret was actually something completely different. Newey doesn't discover a trick. Newey confirms a problem. And not just any problem, one that calls the entire project into question. Because when a Formula One car begins to physically affect the driver to the point of forcing him to abandon, we are no longer talking about performance. We are talking about limits. Limits that Aston Martin crossed without being able to fully control them. And that is the true beginning of this whole story. Not a hidden secret, but a truth that could no longer be hidden. And this is where the story takes the most important turn. Because understanding what was happening to the car is only half the problem. The other half, the most critical, is understanding why Adrian Newey reacts the way he does after China. Because Newey is not just any engineer. He is someone who has seen absolutely everything in Formula One. Extreme solutions, concepts at the limit of the regulations, cars that are impossible to drive. But what is found here is different. It is not a difficult car. It is not an unstable car. It is a car that is crossing a line that should never be crossed. And that line is the pilot's. When the data from China begins to be analyzed in depth, everything comes together in a much more worrying way. It's not just what was seen on the track with Alonso, it's not just the abandonment, it's the correlation between what Newey had warned before the season and what finally happens in real race conditions. Because those vibrations were not random. They came directly from Honda's new hybrid system, integrated into an extremely aggressive car concept. A package that, on paper, sought to maximize performance, but in practice it generated an oscillation frequency that the chassis could not absorb correctly. The result is brutal. All that movement ends up being transferred to the pilot. And here is the point that changes everything. In Formula One, technical problems usually have solutions. You adjust the suspension, modify the setup, introduce aerodynamic improvements. But when the problem is in the interaction between engine, structure, and driver, it is no longer something you can fix in a weekend. It is a problem of concept. And that's exactly what Newey detects. Because when analyzing what happened in China, you don't see a specific failure. You see a structural limit of the car. You see that beyond a certain number of turns, the AMR26 is no longer physically viable. He sees that performance no longer depends only on the car, but on how much the driver can last before losing sensitivity. And that, in Formula One, is unacceptable. That's why his reaction is not surprise, it's frustration. Frustration because this doesn't appear out of nowhere. Frustration because there were already signs. Frustration because, somehow, the project continued to move forward even knowing that this risk existed. And above all, frustration because now you can no longer hide. China exposes everything. It states that the car has real physical limitations. It states that the components begin to suffer fatigue to the point of parts falling off. It states that the pilot cannot complete a race under normal conditions. And most importantly, it exposes that Aston Martin does not have a quick solution. Because when the problem is at the base of the design, any change involves redesigning key elements of the car. It's not an improvement. It's practically starting over in certain areas. And this is where the hidden secret narrative ends up breaking down. There is nothing Aston Martin was hiding to gain an advantage. What was really hidden was the magnitude of the problem. A problem that could be hidden in testing. A problem that could be controlled in short batches. But in the race, it became impossible to contain. And when Newey sees all this reflected in real data, in telemetries, in Alonso's behavior, he understands that it is not just another failure. It is an alarm signal. A sign that the project as it is not sustainable. And now we come to the most important part of this whole story, the consequences. Because everything that happened in China does not remain a simple anecdote, it is not an isolated problem that can be forgotten in the next race. What happened marks a before and after for Aston Martin, and especially for Fernando Alonso. Because when a driver has to abandon not because of a direct mechanical failure, but because his own body cannot support the car, that absolutely changes the rules of the game. Here we are no longer talking about performance. We talk about viability. Aston Martin is in an extremely delicate situation because any decision they make from now on has an enormous cost. If they try to maintain the current concept, they know that they are limited. They cannot squeeze the car out in the race, they cannot do long runs normally, they cannot guarantee that the driver reaches the end in optimal conditions. But if they decide to correct the problem, the price is even higher. Because that involves redesigning fundamental parts of the car. Engine integration, chassis structure, vibration absorption. It is not an update, it is practically redoing the DNA of the car in the middle of the season. And in Formula One, doing that means losing time, performance, and possibly any competitive option in the short term. And here the figure of Alonso appears in the center of everything. Because he is the one who is directly suffering the consequences. He is the one who has to decide, together with the team, to what extent this car can continue to be pushed. And this opens up an uncomfortable question. How long can a pilot last before the risk is no longer worth it? What happened in China was not an isolated extreme case. It was a warning. A demonstration that the limit has already been reached, and that crossing it has real consequences. And that puts Aston Martin in a position where each race becomes an unknown. Because even if the car improves in performance, if the underlying problem is still there, nothing really changes. And this is what makes Newey's reaction even more meaningful. It's not just technical frustration. It is a vision for the future. Because he understands perfectly that a project like this, if it is not corrected at its roots, is doomed. No matter how much potential it has on paper, no matter how much they can optimize it, if the car is not sustainable in real conditions, there is no development that will save it. And that's where everything connects. Rumors, videos, the hidden secret, narrative, all of this is born because people try to find a spectacular explanation for something that is already shocking. But the reality is simpler and harsher at the same time. Aston Martin did not hide an advantage. I was trying to contain a problem. A problem that was completely exposed in China. A problem that now defines the future of the team. And the most disturbing of all, this is just beginning. Because if they don't find a quick solution, each race can become a repeat of what happened, or even worse. And then the question will no longer be what Newey discovered, but until when Aston Martin will be able to sustain this situation. And after everything we have seen, the reality is much clearer, but also much more uncomfortable to accept. Because this whole story that has been built around Aston Martin, a supposed secret and explosive discovery by Newey, in reality hides something completely different. There is no trick. There is no illegal advantage. What there is a limit. A technical limit that the AMR26 has crossed without being able to control it. A limit at which the car stops being a performance machine and becomes a real physical problem for the driver. And that is something that in Formula One cannot be allowed, nor made up, nor hidden for a long time. China was not the origin of the problem. It was the moment when he was exposed. That's where everything fits together, where the previous warnings, the symptoms on the track and the team's internal decisions are connected in a single image. Aston Martin was not hiding an advantage. It was trying to buy time in the face of a problem that it still does not know how to solve. And that's what really makes Newey's reaction make sense. Because he doesn't get angry at discovering something unexpected. He gets angry because it confirms that the problem is structural, that there is no quick solution, that there is no immediate patch, and that the entire project can be compromised if action is not taken from the base. Right now, Aston Martin is at a crossroads. Go ahead with this concept and accept its limitations, or take a step back, redesign and assume the sporting cost that this implies. And in the middle of all this, there is Fernando Alonso. A driver who doesn't need to prove anything, but who finds himself driving a car that demands more than it should, not in talent, but in physical endurance. And that completely changes the perspective of what is at stake. Because in the end, the big question is not what Aston Martin was hiding. The real question is, can they afford to continue like this? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.